Welcome to our students, faculty, administration, staff, and our guests from St. Joseph's High School. My name is Dr. Jennifer Lancaster, and I have the privilege of serving St. Francis College as the Academic Dean and Vice President for Academic Affairs. Welcome to Reflections on a Life in Public Service, our brand new discussion series between President Martinez-Saenz and leaders in politics, business, and the community. We kicked off the series with Congressman Nydia Velázquez from New York's 7th Congressional District in September. I'm pleased to let you know that you can mark your calendars for February 3rd, when we'll host our next guest speaker, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. The upcoming lecture series will also feature Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, and others to be announced. We hope you'll join us for all of those. But on to today's events. We're thrilled to welcome as our second guest in Reflections of a Life in Public Service, Congressman Peter King. Congressman King is a proud member of the St. Francis College class of 1965. He is currently serving his 14th term as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, most recently re-elected in November of 2018. He represents the 2nd Congressional District of South Shore, Long Island, which includes parts of Nassau and Suffolk County. We all learned last week that the congressman has decided to retire after this current term and will not seek re-election in 2020. We wish him the best in his retirement and look forward to hearing more about his plans for the next chapter. Prior to serving in Congress, Congressman King was elected to 3 terms as the Comptroller of Nassau County. Before serving in county government, Representative King had extensive experience as a practicing attorney and civic leader. He began his political career in November 1977 by winning the election to the Town of Hempstead Council. Congressman King is a member of numerous civic organizations, including the Knights of Columbus and the Fighting 69th Veterans Corps. Representative King is a strong supporter of law enforcement, our military, and has fought hard to bring veterans benefits into the 21st century. He has also received the AARP's Legislative Leadership Award for combating elder abuse and exploitation. As I mentioned before, Representative King is a graduate of St. Francis College. He received his JD from the University of Notre Dame Law School. He is a lifelong resident of New York and has lived in Nassau County for more than 50 years. It is now my pleasure to introduce Congressman King and the President of St. Francis College, Dr. Miguel Martinez-Saenz.
So it seems like we can go home. She said it all.
That's right.
Right? So we're shutting this thing down soon. So I want to put it in context why it is we're doing these reflections on a life in public service. And one of the things that we believe fundamentally is that dialogue is essential. And for us to engage in dialogue, we have to open our minds and our hearts to others, sometimes people we disagree with. And we like to remind folks that St. Francis did this very thing when he crossed the battlefield to talk with the Sultan. That's an iconic story for us, and it's a story that's important for a variety of reasons. One is it's not only the venture across a battlefield with risk, but also a recognition that it might not bear fruit. Right? So St. Francis wasn't going to win an argument with a sultan. He was going to engage in conversation with a sultan. It's a critically important way to think about what it is we're doing here. Right? We're trying to humanize folks that have taken on a life of public service, and we'll get to some of the questions related to sacrifice and courage as we get into a Q&A. But I think it's important for us to understand that the prime driver for this is really dialogue, to foster an element for dialogue. A couple of things that Dean Lancaster said was the relationship to the National Guard, your local work before being a congressperson in the U.S. House. I want to emphasize one thing that came out very recently, which was the New York unions celebrating you and Jerry Nadler on a bipartisan bill that was supporting folks in 9/11, healthcare workers and victims, and we thank you for those efforts. incredibly important to underscore for those of you who don't know. I know our congressman knows this, but on 9/11, not only did we lose alums in the towers, we actually played a significant leadership role, and this has been one of the impetus for us to begin to celebrate more openly first responders and others in public service. And so I just tell you the story for those of you who haven't heard it. The commissioner for fire, New York City wide, was named Thomas Van Essen. He was a graduate of the college. When the number 2 person at the fire department went down on ground zero, he called on Michael Regan to be his number 2 at the fire department, also a St. Francis College graduate. The number 2 deputy commissioner in New York City Police Department, Joe Dunn, St. Francis College graduate. And the director of Office Emergency Management for New York City, Richard Shear, was also a St. Francis College graduate. And I frame that for y'all to understand that public service is critical to what we do. We believe that the highest calling is giving back, and so we're thankful for your presence and we're thankful for your service. So as we begin, let us begin from the beginning.
Okay.
You were born in Manhattan, so this is storytelling for us.
There you go.
Sunnyside, Queens. Can you talk to us a little bit about growing up in Queens, your childhood?
Yeah, it was very different from today. It was basically then it was Irish and Jewish ethnic neighborhood, first, second generation. Some of the classic stereotypes. I lived in an apartment house. Next to it was the Irish Celtic bar. Up the block was Lynch's funeral home. It was a lot of cops, a lot of firemen, a lot of construction workers. I went to Catholic schools, St. Teresa's, and then went to Brooklyn Prep High School. It was again, it was at the time it seemed very ordinary. Now you realize it's a little different than in fact, I went to a funeral last week with a friend of mine, Jimmy Boyle, who's head of the firefighters union, and the priest who gave the eulogy was from Sunnyside. He said we weren't smart enough to know we were poor. So, but yeah, I could give you a real rags to riches story, but it was great. I mean, nobody complained, nobody knew. It was different. The guy who sat in front of me, his brother went to the electric chair. And again, that was just, nobody came and gave us marshmallows, and nobody felt sorry for us. Life went on, and his family stayed there forever. He had brothers, and I guess he had 3 brothers. And then other examples like that. And you also had people who went on to achieve great things. It was basically blue-collar upbringing, but in many ways we had none of the psychological issues that face kids today. Life was a lot simpler. We didn't realize it at the time, but it was, again, there was something about New York neighborhoods, and every ethnic group has its own stories to tell about the neighborhoods they grew up in. But again, I mean, it was also limited. I mean, I didn't know anybody that wasn't Irish, Italian, or Jewish.
Yeah.
I mean, that was basically it. And probably almost everyone except for the Jewish guys were Catholic. And Catholic schools, we had 72 kids in the classroom, and we went to school only 4 hours a day, 8 to 12 or 12 to 4. So it's, again, that sounds hard. My God, how those kids do it. You didn't think about it when you were doing it. Also, my mother was one of those fanatics. She was always afraid we were going to get polio, we were going to do this. She was always worried about getting sick and something was going to happen to you. Meanwhile, when I was 11 years old, since we had no grass in Sunnyside, by baseball, we had to take the train out to Flushing Meadow. So here you had a bunch of 11-year-old kids taking the trains by themselves, no adults, no supervision, no adult coaches. We used to go over to Ebbets Field for baseball games. I was like, I think 3 trains to get to Ebbets Field with 10, 11, 12 years old. So in many ways, it was much safer. And again, things you took for granted. Now, if a kid goes off the block, the helicopter parents are wondering where he is, and you have 15-year-old kids that can't cross a big street. I mean, so life has changed. On the other hand, kids today, I have grandchildren, they're so much smarter than we were. They've been exposed to so much more. They know so much more. But I guess part of the limitations is they really didn't have to live much life on their own. So I don't know how that works out when you hit 22. You're a lot smarter, and do you have the life experience? I don't know.
Yeah. No, fundamentally different. It's kind of interesting. When I went away to college, I grew up in an environment. Well, I grew up in Miami, and I tell folks we didn't interact with non-Cuban people because the refugees. I mean, it's 1 million people go to Miami all of a sudden at once. So it's really this little enclave, and we didn't know. We thought that's the way the world was.
Right.
And then when I went to Tallahassee, I was like, oh wow, that's not the way people live, right? I mean, I have this silly story I tell people about trying to get rice and beans in a restaurant, and they don't sell rice and beans in Tallahassee. And I'm thinking, what do you mean you don't eat rice and beans? Every human being eats rice and beans. And they're like, no, we don't. So again, a certain sense, right? Everybody was working class, but everybody just thought that's just the way the world was.
Well, I was a kid with Irma Garcia. When I was at St. Francis, we had no women and 1 Puerto Rican in the whole school, Sammy Ramirez. And now she's running the place. I don't know.
Easy, 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 easy. She thinks she's running the place.
See, that's a politics. You divide and conquer. That's how you
How about, how about the encouragement in school? So let's talk about elementary school and your parents, your father, police officer. How does that formation, right, lead? I mean, you've talked some of it as simplicity, but there's also a sense, right? How does that take place? Where there's certain teachers in school that encourage you to do certain things, that bent you a certain way?
That happened more in high school than grammar school. Grammar school was basically nuns yelling at you, telling you how to get your math done. There was no excuses. I went to Brooklyn Prep High School. It was a Jesuit school. In fact, Professor Hughes, who taught here for a number of years at St. Francis, I had him both in high school and in college. One thing about Brooklyn Prep was they really encouraged you. Now, they always said it was not a Catholic education; it was a Jesuit education.
Right.
They had their, and also Dr. Hughes used to talk about how different it was being with Jesuits and Franciscans, because Franciscans believed in original sin. They realized that people were allowed to make mistakes every now and then.
Right.
Jesuits were intolerant of that. But no, seriously, it was really a well-rounded education. They forced you to read. They spoke about things that took you outside your own neighborhood. It just let you know that the whole world was not the street or the block that you grew up in. And they also, though, and this is something, maybe it's generational, I'm kidding about them being strict, because really they were very, they used to encourage creative writing, which was not common at that time, believe it or not. It was basically, they give you 1 or 2 words and just tell you to write a 500-word essay off that.
Right.
And that's when you realize, I first realized there's some really crazy kids in the class. You give a guy 2 words, he wrote an essay. Where did he get this from? You know? It was like semi-pornography. But any of it is that there was no excuse for not getting something done on time. You could say, my house burned down, my parents were killed, I got shot in the leg around the corner. No excuse, you got to get your homework in. I mean, it was that type thing, which is good. I mean, I don't think I've ever been late for a meeting. Anytime I have dinner with Glenn, I show up in time at the restaurant in Pamontes. I don't want him yelling at me for being late, especially in Williamsburg. It's his turf. But no, seriously, it's the idea. There's no excuses for not getting it done. There are excuses for not being able to achieve what you want, because again, there's certain limitations on you. But there's no excuse for not getting it done on time.
Yeah, it's one of the things we tell young people, right? I tell them all the time. I mean, there's no excuse for not being prepared. There's no excuse for not being on time. There's things you can control, and you're talking about the Jesuit saying. There's an interesting thing about we had a marketing person come in when I first arrived, and he says, we got to get rid of this Catholic. I don't know how to differentiate between Catholic this, who are the Franciscans doing, what are the Dominicans doing, what are the Salians doing. And I said, you don't have to do that. The Jesuits aren't saying they're Catholic, they're saying they're Jesuits. So you need to say we're Franciscan. I mean, that's what you need to do in terms of thinking about that orientation. Talk to us a little bit about we're in high school, and I assume, right? I mean, in my environment, right, was my parents were always like, what's your career, what's your career? Was your career trajectory one you knew already in high school? So,
no, and again, I'm older than you. We didn't talk that much about careers. It was making it through the day and making it through the week and making it through the month. But the feeling was that my generation, which is basically second generation, that you were expected to go to college if you could, if you had reasonable amount of intelligence, go to college, which was not true. Certainly in the Irish community, it wasn't true of the first generations that came here. They basically was to work and survive. But they really emphasized the importance of going to college, but not for any particular reason. I mean, I don't remember anybody saying, I'm going to be an architect, or I'm going to be a philosophy teacher, or I'm going to be a chemist. It was basically go as far as you could and see what happens at the end. So I always had an interest. Well, my main interest was to play baseball. But after John Dockery ended up playing football for the Jets, he had about an 800-foot home run off me in the parade grounds. That ended my baseball career. And my basketball career ended at the end of my sophomore year in high school. So I had to find something where you can make money and survive. It's not in sports. So I always enjoyed politics, but I never knew anybody in it. I never expected to get into it. I was considered a pretty good writer, and I didn't have any interest in teaching. Not for any reason. It just never appealed to me. And I figured, what else can I do? Go to law school. But I never envisioned being a great lawyer. Just go to law school, make a living. And St. Francis was known as a very solid school. That's probably the best way to describe it. It was very solid. And in my class, it was almost all first and second Italian Americans, Irish American students who were here. And it really was a very solid education. When I graduated from St. Francis, and I was accepted to Notre Dame Law School, which came as a surprise to me. And I went out there and I saw all the major universities these guys had gone to. I thought I'd be, struggling. And not that I'm any genius, believe me, I wasn't. But I was able to hold my own with all of them. And I was amazed at the level of education we had received compared to guys from Stanford and Harvard and everything else. I mean, I was never, any mistakes I made in law school were not because of my undergraduate education. I mean, it was really, on all of these, including the LSATs and everything else, I was more than able to hold my own with all of them. And so this really gave me a solid education, but also it was rooted in reality, because very few people here, certainly when I was there, probably true today, were millionaires or sons and daughters, no daughters, sons of millionaires. It was like I worked full time the last, at the end of my sophomore year, right through senior year, I worked basically a 40-hour-a-week job. So I go to school, I try to work my schedule out, like from 9 until 2 or 10 until 3. Then I worked 4 to 12 with the Railway Express over in 10th Avenue, Manhattan.
Yeah, and John Tully, our former board chair and graduate, and also a Notre Dame alum, has a similar story in terms of that. So you've talked a little bit about, how you chose the college. I'd like for you to elaborate a little bit on that, if you can. And as you do that, maybe talk to us a little bit about your favorite class, why it was your favorite class, and then your favorite professor here, and.
Yeah, I guess. Again, it was not today we did have all this extensive analysis of what school you're going to go to. It was that in the Catholic school environment I was brought up in, St. Francis was known as a very, solid school. You're going to get a good education there. Without reflecting on some of the other schools, it was considered where you're going to get the best liberal arts education. So that was the other thing that was stressed. And I went here, the head of then there was no political science major, it was history. So all the political science courses you took blended into the history degree. And the chairman of the history department was Dr. Flynn, who was like right out of an old-fashioned movie. He was like this tough Irish guy. He loved politics. He liked to play the role of being the tyrant in the classroom, and it was his way or no way type thing. But that was really all an act. He was really an excellent, excellent teacher. And the way he came to St. Francis was he had been, I think, the head of the department up at Fordham for a number of years. And then, again, Fordham's a Jesuit school. He got into an argument or a fight with the administration at Fordham. And not only did he come to St. Francis, he brought about 3 top professors with him. He sort of raided the place, and they came down here. And so I had Dr. Flynn for history, and then economics was also, economics courses could be applied to a history major. You had Dr. Ford came down, there was Dr. Casey. These are people he brought with him from Fordham. And there was also the solid basis here at St. Francis we had. There's a Dr. Ellis, who was much more liberal than I would ever be. He was an expert in Latin American history. He became nationally renowned. So I, again, majored in history, and probably Dr. Flynn's courses, but also Dr. Hughes. And when he was in, I took, I think, 2 or 3 courses with him. And I give Dr. Hughes credit for this. I'm up here now, I'm shooting my mouth off. You see me on television carrying on. I was really one of those kids who walked around with his head down. I never really expected anyone to listen to what I had to say. Once you give up a home run in baseball, that was our world, so I figured nobody cared about it after that. And, but I remember we had it was modern European history class, and he divided the class into groups of 2, and we had a debate, an issue, and I had to debate the Yalta Conference, which was FDR's conference after World War II, with a guy, Tom McShane, who ended up going to Fordham Law School and a top FBI agent. In fact, the movie was out a few years ago about the art theft. I forget the name of it, American something or other. Anyway, Tom was really the FBI agent that broke that whole case open. He was really a top guy in the FBI. Anyway, he and I had a debate on Yalta. It was like a 45-minute debate, back and forth, questions and everything else. And afterwards, Dr. Hughes took me aside. He said, you're really good up there. You can handle yourself well. And first time anyone had ever said that. So it's really interesting. So that sticks in my head. Now, that says something about me psychologically. I'm 20 years old. First time anybody ever said anything good about me. But in any event, that's why it sticks there. Nobody said anything bad either. Well, some guy said something bad. No, but Hughes actually singled me out. He should stay on that. The other story I told you upstairs, though, is then we had oral comprehensives in history. And you had to take it. You went before a panel of 3, 4 teachers, and I say 3, 4, or 5 because when I went up for mine, it was on a Friday morning, there was 1 empty seat, and I realized it was Dr. Hughes wasn't there. He was the toughest at this. He'd come up with questions and nobody had any idea where he found them. He's not there. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole time, afraid he was going to come into the room. I made it. I finished. Dr. Flynn says, you wait out in the hall. He goes, okay, you passed. You weren't great. That was most you ever get from Flynn. You weren't great, but you passed. That's all I wanted to know. I said, well, thank you, doctor. As I'm leaving and walking down the hall, who's running up the stairs for Dr. Hughes? And I thank God right there. I must be on God's good side. The three guys after me all flunked the oral count. They come back and take them again.
So a couple things I take, especially for the students, right? This isn't Burger King. You don't get it your way. So Dr. Flynn said you get it his way, not your way. That's an important thing. But, I mean, the other piece is really in terms of the mentorship. And I think, you know, especially for the young people and the high school students, you have an opportunity to find a mentor that's going to make a transformative difference in your life, right? You have that by virtue of being in these kind of spaces, educational spaces. So I urge you to take advantage, get to know your folks, because critically important. So Notre Dame law.
So one other thing about St. Francis, when I was here, there were the well-known professors, but the outstanding student by far, and he was 3 years ahead of me, was Frank Macchiarola, who was the president of the college later on. Frank had like a 3.99 GPA, and that's when getting a 2.0 was considered a lot. So he was in a class by himself, Frank. He was student body president, and he's a great guy, and I really knew him well over the years after that. He was really a legend, really great guy.
Yeah, so that's another piece about the social networks that you're able to form in these community environments. Jen, do we have a question? Are you gonna? She has some students out there, I think.
Sure.
We have some students who prepared some questions. Our first person is Moises Lopez, currently a sophomore majoring in criminal justice and also a member of the Thomas More Pre-Law Society.
So my question to you, Congressman King, is in what ways has attending St. Francis College and Notre Dame Law School has prepared you for your current profession?
Yeah, and I don't want to sound overly religious in saying this, because it wouldn't matter what your religion is or any religion at all, but there was a moral dimension to courses we were taught. I mean, we'd be taught, let's say in history or even in English, analyzing stuff, analyzing writings, but that there is a moral dimension to what we do. It's not just in the abstract. It's not just all black and white, and that you can't, go through life as a Trappist monk or whatever. The idea is to keep, remember that actions have consequences, and try to keep in your mind as long as you can, as much as you can, the unintended consequences. And that's something I've tried to follow in politics, because everything that you do that you think is right, and even if it turns out that it is right, there's probably still going to be 10% getting hurt along the way, or 10% are going to lose something they had before, which you had no way of anticipating. The idea is trying to anticipate as much as you can. But I would say that's probably the main thing is, again, when you're in the day-to-day of real life, you're not always as perfect as you want to be. But I would say that it gives you, at the very least, a conscience that you have to respond to, and which I found is different from, and again, I'm not saying anyone here is non-Catholic, don't take it the wrong way. It could be any religion or anything that has something that's beyond yourself. And I think that's what I got out of St. Francis.
Yeah, so the moral compass is critically important, right? We try to get young people to understand the values-based. I was having a conversation with some college presidents that happen to be Catholic schools, and they said people don't value Catholic higher ed. I said that's false. First, families value values-based education more than ever. The challenge they're having, maybe we get to this later on, is that they can't afford it. It's not that they don't want to be in these spaces, it's that they're having difficulty paying for it because of the cost of private education. And certainly the cost of private education in New York City is getting prohibitive. And one of the things I like to say, and some folks hear me say this a lot, is, we need to prepare students to make a living, but more importantly, we need to prepare them to make a life. And I think what you're saying to some extent is right. St. Francis College and Notre Dame focus on the life component, the living component, but also the life component, and that moors you in ways that are critically important.
One thing which I appreciated after I was out of undergrad and law school is the competition in other schools. Again, this was my era, and other schools were so fierce among students. You have people stealing books from each other or taking books out of the library. I never saw any of that at St. Francis or Notre Dame. And again, nobody would ever hesitate helping you. Like, geez, I have a problem with this. They would give you the stuff to look at. They would try to explain it to you. So there was never, ever was there competition among students. Now, there was competition to try to get the best out of the professors. But as far as between ourselves, I never saw any of that. And I'm not being naive. And I spoke to guys who went to other schools. It was almost taken for granted that if you could screw the other guy, you would do it, if that would help you move ahead. I never saw that in either school.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more. It seems like even some of the young people that we see coming in, right, there's a hyper-competitiveness. And, it comes from This is all over again. It comes from a place of scarcity. It's, it's like the concept of happiness. If you're happy and I'm happy, there's no less happiness for other people. Everybody can be happy, right? So an orientation of abundance. And I think this is, to some extent, very Franciscan in terms of thinking about, right, we have enough, right? If we decide that, we're part of a community. I like to say this thing, right, when we talk about their problems, then there's an issue, right? When we talk about our problems, it's very different. So you're trying to figure out how to negotiate a space with your, right? This is our situation. And so what did you know when you went to Notre Dame? What were you thinking when you went to Notre Dame? What were you going to do? What was your career trajectory at that point?
Well,
Or what was your thinking about your career
I
trajectory?
was thinking about the first semester. The dean, this old dean, Dean O'Mara, and first day of school, maybe you've heard this from other schools, we're all lined up, we're all sitting there, and he goes, look at the man on your left, one on the right, because one of you is not going to be here. And both guys look smarter than me, and I thought, oh my God, this is it. I mean, they had, the year before I got there, I think 25% have been flunked out the first year. So that just surviving was it for me. No, I just, it was to do as well as I could, get a decent job. I had again, it was different then. People didn't plan out their careers. It was, I mean, there was a few guys. One guy, a roommate of mine, always wanted to be a professor, and he knew that from day one, and he actually became a very successful professor, wrote a few books and everything. But for the most part, it was do as well as you can and see what opens up. It was, again, the competition was not like it is today, and it was not, and also getting a job wasn't that hard. I never knew anyone who graduated from high school, college, graduate school, who didn't get a job right away. I never knew anyone who was out of work. Now you talk to students how hard it is getting jobs. There was always a job. It may not be the perfect job. There was always plenty of jobs. The economy was, not that we even fully understood it, but I guess the economy was growing, and there was real opportunity. Certainly, if you're a white person, a white guy would always get a job. Now, I can't speak for the way it was in the minority community. I can't speak for how it was with women. But any guy, any Irish, Italian, Jewish, German-American, Polish-American guy, if you had a college degree, you had a job somewhere.
Yeah.
And it was going to be, at least a halfway decent job, maybe a great job.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking too about this, the simplicity of it. There was a simplicity to it. I mean, when I told my parents I was going to study religion, they weren't very happy with that when undergraduate. But I mean, they were oriented to work. But it was also a sense that, I mean, we really didn't interact with many folks, and we were fairly insular, but in the community, people got work. They didn't get the work they wanted. I mean, we had people that came from Cuba that were lawyers, that were parking cars, but they were able to get work and pay the bills.
Right.
And now it's, as you know, it's becoming a little more difficult.
Congressman King,
Yeah.
you have really invoked some St. Francis College legends in Artie Hughes and Dr. Mack, and brought up the importance of mentors. Our next question is from Maeve Conlon, a junior majoring in adolescent education with a concentration in history. Maeve is also a student ambassador and president of Kappa Delta Pi, the International Honors Education Society.
I was not in that, so.
Good morning, Congressman King. A mentor to myself, as well as a dear friend and colleague to my mom, was Tanya Sumner. She was living with metastatic breast cancer and sadly lost her fight this September. We were the original sponsor for H.R. 2178, Metastatic Breast Cancer Access to Care Act, and introduced it to the House. I would love to say thank you on behalf of Mrs. Sumner and her family, and let her know that we appreciate the hard work you have done to help those with MBC. What inspired you to sponsor this bill?
Yeah, breast cancer, certainly coming from Long Island, it has one of the highest rates of breast cancer anywhere in the country. They're still trying to figure out the reasons. Was it because of the defense plants that were on the island and polluted the groundwater? Again, there's no, the surveys have been inconclusive, but there's no doubt there's a very high rate of breast cancer. My mother had breast cancer. My daughter was diagnosed last year. She's doing fine. But it's just a growing, an epidemic. I mean, I mentioned polio before. If you were a kid when I was growing up, that was the fear. People had polio. Then suddenly nobody got it. They come up with a vaccine. But with cancer, we haven't, even though great progress has been made, still people are getting cancer. There's no medication you can take beforehand. There's no vaccine you can take beforehand to prevent you from getting it. You hope that it's detected in time and the treatment will work. But as far as actually preventing it, so far there's no, there is none, and there's no absolute cure for cancer. So breast cancer was probably the most predominant disease. In my district, there were very active groups on Long Island that worked on it. And so it was something which, again, I put a lot of time and still putting a lot of time into. Also, that's expanded and now with prostate cancer. Now, my father died of prostate cancer. No man ever discussed prostate cancer. And quite frankly, I'm dating myself now, very few women or anyone discussed breast cancer until Betty Ford, President Ford's wife, had breast cancer. When he went on television and announced his wife had breast cancer, everyone was shocked. How could he talk about that? I mean, it was something nobody spoke about. And then a month later, Vice President Rockefeller's wife was diagnosed with it. So now it's common. You know, women go in for the checkups all the time, and it's something that's openly discussed, and a lot of progress is made. That wasn't true with prostate cancer. Men, I remember my father was diagnosed. No one knew what it was. It was people were whispering about it, and but now that's where actually some progress has been made with the PSA test, where you can detect it at a very early stage. But it's one way you have to educate people, especially in certain communities, like in the African American community, there's a higher incidence of prostate cancer, to make sure that you go into those communities, especially the lower income ones, to provide the testing is the easiest thing in the world, and to make sure that you reach out on that. So, and then others, again, being in Congress, if you're reasonably healthy yourself, you realize how lucky you are, because all these people with different illnesses, advocates come in, and you realize how many kids suffer from different disorders, from different illnesses. Even, like I never heard of really peanut allergy when I was growing up. You talk to families where their whole life revolves around the fact that their kid not only can't eat peanuts, like if he goes to a baseball game and there was peanuts in the seat from the game before, that could affect him. So I'm using that as an example. So you become aware of a lot of these. But breast cancer is one that just struck so many people, and certainly in the prime of life. So we've done made a lot of progress on it, and it's totally bipartisan. I mean, I work very closely with Dianne Feinstein on that, who was like a longtime Democrat in the Senate, and Senator D'Amato, and he was Senator Schumer. So again, it's a bipartisan issue. Also, I can just mention on the issue of bipartisanship, you read about how we're all killing each other in Congress, and we all hate each other. To a large extent, that's true. But seriously, within the New York delegation, like you mentioned, Nydia Velasquez, Hakeem Jeffries, Yvette Clark, we work so closely on so many issues, and it's never come up. Nydia and I got elected the same year. I guess she's going to remind me she's going to outlast me in Congress now, because I'm stepping down and she's not. But Nydia and Hakeem and Yvette, we work on so many issues, including even some hot-button issues, like when there was the charges of police brutality, and I was more defending the police, and Hakeem was more on the side of the community. We said the police were overreacting. We met and actually found a bill we could agree on to send a signal as far as providing more lighting and public housing projects. That was after some kid was innocently killed by an NYPD officer, and we felt that's something where we could show we're working together on an issue involving the police to sort of calm things down. You wouldn't find that in other parts of the country. Like other states, the Republicans and Democrats never meet, never talk. Like last week when I announced I wasn't running, Senator Schumer put out a very good statement. I give him credit for that. He was attacked by somebody for it, but anyone who understood New York politics was really not surprised by that. I would have said the same thing about him. And so we do work together, which is unique. I think it's maybe part of the New York experience, and I'm tying that to St. Francis, where people know they have to get along, you have to find a way to get together, and you meet people from different, as you get older. Even though I grew up in a all-white neighborhood, it was also Jewish, Italian, so you learn to deal with other people. You come here to school, you realize not everyone's the same, and you just, and also you learn that you have to negotiate and you have to work things out, that there's no absolute answer. That's one thing. Somebody has a lesson from college. One thing I definitely learned from all the history and political science courses I took here is that nobody has the absolute answer, and no answer is 100% right. And if you think you're absolutely right, you're absolutely wrong. And that's one thing which is really missing in Congress today, and I'm sort of diverging a bit here, is that people come from districts where to get elected, you got to be 100% one way or the other. So they have no incentive to meet with people from the other party, or even people from within their party who have different views than they do. Coming from New York, you realize, as brilliant as we are, we don't have all the answers, and we try to fight.
That's important to understand, because I think, one of the things we reflect on and sometimes we take for granted in certain spaces, right? I've lived in different places, and the more homogenous a community is, right, the black and white issues become, very ideological in a strict sense, right? We're in this space, right, there's a complexity to the way you live in the world that it's got to be nuanced all the time. You can't just say it's either this or that, because there's a nuance to, what we experience walking off a train, right? And I think that sometimes we don't reflect on how this lived experience actually prepares us to engage in these environments, in these conversations that are complex, nuanced, et cetera. And as you know, when I remember when I lived in Minnesota, I mean, I can't imagine in Minnesota, you had people outside of the Twin Cities talking to folks in rural environments. I mean, the shots were coming across so aggressively, and it just never felt like there were conversations, even from a higher ed perspective, where you'd assume, right, in higher ed, people would be, no, they didn't want to be seen with one another. They didn't want to be seen talking to one another.
If I could get one example on that, again, at St. Francis, it was my senior year. We were taking a seminar, I think, in African history. And the consensus was, so the first 5 weeks of the course, speakers come in, everyone was against apartheid. It was evil, and it was. But I mean, that's all we heard. The sixth week, Dr. Flynn brought in the South African ambassador to the UN, and he totally defended South Africa and why apartheid was right and why it was the way to go. And nobody in the audience could really challenge him because they never heard the other side. And Flynn did that on purpose. Afterwards, the next day, he said, "You guys are so stupid." He gave all the reasons why, why the South African guy was right. But his point was never accept anything as being the total truth until you hear both sides.
Right. Yeah, I got a story. It's an interesting story. I was with some young people. I used to go with students to Nicaragua to build homes with these pineapple farmers. Anyway, they got the tickets and they got cheap tickets, so we had to drive 5.5 hours to Chicago to fly down and right. So I'm now with these college students getting in a van, 5.5 hours coming back, and they're charged, right? And they're charged. And they're talking about the IMF and the World Bank, and these things are the most evil institutions they've ever encountered. And I start asking them questions about the IMF and the World Bank. They don't have a clue what it is. They don't have a clue what it's doing. I said, listen. Well, and then they would say to me, "Well, you like them?" I said, "That's the point is irrelevant. Whether I like them or not, whether I think they're doing good in the world or not. The point is that if you're going to make a criticism, you have to understand the other side. You have to understand what these institutions are set up for." And I think, that's what one of the things we're hoping to do is get young people to realize, right? You've got to understand there's more to the media soundbite that meets the eye, right? And if you're going to take your news from media soundbites, you're not going to understand what's going on in the world. So,
or from the internet,
or from a lot of the internet. I'm going to go back and then forth. If you hadn't moved into the house, what would you have been doing today? You have a sense of?
Yeah, I'd be practicing law, and it would be satisfying, but it wouldn't be as satisfying as I'm doing now. It'd be, in a way, a way to make a living, but it really wouldn't be something my heart and soul was in. And I'd be able to go to more St. Francis basketball games, men and women. In fact, I sat on the bench last year of the women's game, and they told Linda what she was doing wrong. She told me to shut up and leave. But anyway,
just for the record, they don't let me sit on the bench. Right? Glenn, you hear that?
No, actually, again, I'd be practicing law. I assume I'd be active in different, I hate to use the word causes, different activities that I'd be interested in. But something would happen. Again, I've always gone through life figuring that the door's going to open, something's going to happen that I'll be satisfied with the other end, and I'll find a way to make it work.
Yeah, well, but it's also important what you just said, right? You would have been making a living, but to use the expression I use, you wouldn't have felt like you were making a life. So, I mean, for young people, especially college students, but also the high school students, understand you have an opportunity, and some of you will know what I'm going to say, to choose to live the life that you want to live. I want to repeat that. You have the opportunity to choose to live the life that you want to live by virtue of being in this space. So that means that you should take that seriously. Figure out how to choose to live the life that you want to live, not a life that simply gives you some money. We all have to get paid, but critically important. Talk to us a little bit about, we'll move towards your first campaign. You make a decision, right, to move into local politics. How's that? And then just move us through it. You're a good storyteller. Move us through then the transition from 77 to 92, how that changes, and how it would change today for somebody to seek elected office.
Yeah, I was in many ways lucky in politics. I said somehow doors opened. I didn't know anybody in politics. I was interested in it. I basically just joined the local Republican club when I moved into the community. And it turned out that in Nassau County, it's a very hierarchical organization. And the Republican leader in each community was like a dictator, at least was that. 65 different communities, and there was one guy at the top who was the county chairman. So the average person never heard of a local leader, but he actually controlled everything politically in that area. I was fortunate enough. I moved into club, I got a bit active, and the guy who was the leader wanted to become a judge. And the county chairman said, you can't become a judge unless you get somebody who can take your place. And I was the only lawyer. So this guy groomed me to be his successor for 2 years, not because he cared about me, he wanted to become a judge. So I ran for leader, and it was a close vote. But it turned out that the guy who thought he was going to win, there was two of us running, a third guy was a state legislator, he thought he was going to win. So he stayed up in Albany, said he was detained by votes, but he wasn't. He was just hanging out, figuring to be a tie. And then he would come in and be the tiebreaker, and he'd be the leader. Fortunately, unfortunately, one of the guys who wasn't sure how he was going to vote was taken to the hospital, and he gave me his proxy on the way to the hospital. So I cast that vote. I ended up winning by one vote, and the other guy was stuck up in Albany. And he didn't get a chance. That's how I became the leader. Then I got involved in politics, and in the government, in the county government, and I was supposed to become an assistant to the county executive and the county attorney. A big political fight broke out, and on New Year's Eve, 1976, I got fired. They called the New Year's Eve Massacre. A whole bunch of us got fired. It was also my wedding anniversary. My wife is waiting at home to go to dinner, and she sees on television I'm fired. So, but again, in politics, if you play it right, I now became a casualty they had to take care of. So I got fired, and I got another job, and then when an opening developed for councilman, they figured, God, this poor guy got fired from his job. We got to take care of him. Meanwhile, I had done better by getting fired than if I hadn't. So I get two things. I get a better job, and I get nominated for councilman, and then it worked that way. But anyway, when it came time for Congress, my predecessor in Congress, I've been his campaign manager. We were good friends. But now I'm announcing 12 months before the next election I'm not running. That year, he didn't announce it until the end of June, because they were going to redraw the lines, and he wanted to keep it secret that he wasn't running, but he had told me all along. So the day that he announced he wasn't running, I was ready to jump in. And I had a tough election. I got outspent 4-1. And again, this is a question of being lucky. It was a new district, and the guy I was running against lived in Manhattan, but he took a residence in Nassau County for the election, but nobody knew who he was, and he was outspending me 4-1. He was a millionaire. And so I knew I was going to be outspent, so I decided to save all my money for the last 2 weeks. He had ads up all along, but we had a great ad on him that we kept away. I don't remember the Lifestyles of Rich and Famous. The guy used to. So we found this guy's townhouse in the city. We found out he hadn't voted in 3/4 of the elections. So we had a voice imitator of the Lifestyle of Rich and Famous saying, "This is a rich guy moving in. He doesn't bother to vote. Now he wants you to vote for him," showing his townhouse and all that. And we held it for the last 2 weeks. Also, we were afraid we were going to get sued by Robin Leach. It was his voice imitator. So anyway, so we held it out. This guy spent all his money. His pollster and consultant was from Washington, D.C. He looked at the numbers 3 weeks out, and he said, "There's no way you can lose. Hold on to your money." It's the other guy. So as he was holding on to his money, suddenly I hit with a 2-week barrage of TV ads with Robin Leach's voice, saying the guy I'm running against is a phony and a dilettante and everything else. I ended up winning. It was 49.6 to 46.6 on election night.
Wow. See, luck plays a role.
Here I am. So it's. But anyway, that's it's so much has to be out there, and unless you're really a multimillionaire, you come from a politically powerful family, you have to get some breaks. But also, you got to be smart enough to take advantage of them. And I would say that's one advantage I had of going to St. Francis. We were all maneuverers. We all knew that none of us was guaranteed anything in life. We always stay alert. And while you wouldn't take advantage of your friend, you certainly can take advantage of your opponent. So I was ready to spring at each different time. And I say it's something I learned. It's the street smarts you get. If you get the academic education plus the street smarts, that's a tough combination to beat.
Yeah, I think that's good to emphasize, right? I mean, there are life lessons that we're learning all the way, and sometimes we don't see how they.
You really don't see it. I mean, all the stuff I'm telling you about now, I didn't realize when I was here. It's
Right.
afterwards you realize what you drew on.
Yeah. One of the things I try to amplify for especially like student athletes, I mean, you have an advantage in terms of you learn naturally, right? So how do you transfer that? And I think young people, certainly young people that are living in difficult situations, they're learning naturally how to negotiate the space. It's just getting them to realize that those skills are transferable, right? Learning how to move in those environments.
Well, if I had been a great athlete, I'd be president of the United States now. I really would have learned that. But you're not. You really have to scrimp to save and move.
Oh, Jay.
Congressman, you alluded to it a little bit before, but we have another question from Savannah Hall, a psychology major who is the chairwoman of the mock trial for the St. Thomas More Pre-Law Society, and is also a member of the Psi Chi Honor Society and Alpha Lambda Delta.
Good morning.
Hi.
So you've been considered one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. So what is your advice to students when it comes to working with people across the ideological scale?
Yeah, again, start off with the premise that you have to be absolutely definite what you believe in, what you think is right. Then go into it thinking that the other person also thinks that he or she is right, and be definite in what you want, but also have an open mind. That's not really as contradictory as it sounds. And also to realize just practically, you're never going to get 100%. So decide what's your cutoff point. If you get 70%, is that enough? 65%? Or is it enough just to cut your losses? So you should have all of that out there and not have a sense of arrogance. I mean, we see this with government shutdowns. Every one of them could have been avoided, but the people who called the shutdown, it was like 100% or nothing. And so I would say reaching out, also letting the people on the other side know that if you do make an agreement or a deal, whatever we want to call it, that you're going to stick to it and you're not going to knife them in the back. You're not going to badmouth them. That's why I'm not saying anything bad about Nydia Velasquez here today. I'm only kidding. By the way, I want you, do me, when Hakeem comes in here and Yvette Clark come in, tell him I'm the greatest speaker you ever heard, and I'm far better than they're doing, okay? Actually, Hakeem Jeffries could well end up being the next Speaker of the House. There's a super talented guy, he really is. He's only been in Congress, I think, 4 years, 6 years? 6 years, I guess. And the inside word is, for what it's worth, and I think it's worth a lot in this case, is Hakeem could very well be the next speaker. He's young, he's African American, he's articulate, he's able to reach out across ethnic lines, religious lines, political lines. Hakeem would be a really, really smart guy. So anyway, but don't make that public, because I'll have to be attacking Hakeem. No, seriously, he's really a great talent you have there.
Yeah, so that's a good thing really in terms of thinking about. So I started with a conversation, right, to enter the dialogue, just to add, right, you got to open your mind and your heart. I mean, you've got to be willing to recognize that you're engaging in dialogue with another person. There's fundamental disagreements in all sorts of ways, but that's one of the dispositions that I urge, especially young people, to recognize, right? You don't always have it right, although. I always tell people, I used to say this when I used to teach philosophy, they would tell me, I like philosophy class. I said, why? Because, everybody's entitled to their opinion. And I go, right, you're entitled to your opinion. You're also entitled to be wrong. But they didn't like that part. But it's a sense, if you have a belief, that means you believe it, right? That means you think it's true. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And somebody else thinks something else is true. That's okay. But now let's just start from there. That I have a belief. Mm-hmm. You have a belief. Now let's start a conversation about, and one of us might end up being wrong. Book, just to concrete as we start drawing a close. I mean, a book that you could recommend for the young people, given the context and the conversation we're having today.
Yeah, maybe again it's dated. I think it's a book that survives. Is Edwin O'Connor's book, The Last Hurrah, which is about politics in Boston. But it's so much more than politics. It's basically about human nature, about human life, about how at the end of your life you're trying to decide whether you did the right thing or not, what who you've helped and hurt along the way. And was it all the energy you put into something, do you, as a result of that, not properly take care of your family or your friends? So it's written from an Irish-American perspective, which means, and for the psychology majors, we're all considered somewhat manic-depressive if we're Irish. So there's all that in there, that even when he does something good, he thinks, I don't know, maybe that's Jewish also. There's this whole idea of guilt. I don't know who's worse, the Catholics or the Jews when it comes to guilt. But it's in there, the whole thing of, he's at the end of his life, he's running his last campaign, he ends up losing it. But in doing that, he meets up with different people in his family, people he's known over the years, finds out who his friends are, who his friends weren't. And to me, it's a very good study of human nature, and I think he got the Pulitzer Prize the year it came out. It's Last Hurrah by Edwin O'Connor. And again, I'm going back because Dr. Flynn made us read that when we were in school. And I didn't know why. Who cares about some Irish politician in Boston? And it's a novel. It's not real anyway. That's the attitude you have when you're 19.
Right.
No offense to 19. You guys are smarter than I was at that age. But anyway, I found that's probably had the most significance on me. And that's probably the main book. Again, I'm sure there's other better written books and more advanced, but I found that it had an impact on me.
We're going to do one more student question, and I'll give you a last word.
You mentioned a little bit about the complicated nature of students are facing this year. John Samuelson, a freshman majoring in political science who is a member of the Pre-Law Society, has a question.
Do you think it's important to encourage entrepreneurship among college students? And if so, if yes, then how so?
Yes, and I'm not even sure if I would have known what entrepreneurship was when I was a freshman in college, but looking at it now, yes. Because when you're, one problem or one potential liability of being in an academic environment is you think everything is academic and you're within the four corners of academia. When you're out in the world, you're being, again, there's competition from everywhere, there's different challenges. There's, basically, if you're taking a course in school and you do all the studying you're supposed to do all the required work, you know you're going to pass. Out in life, you could be doing everything right and still not pass. So being an entrepreneur, I think it builds up your skills, it helps you prepare for the unanticipated, and it also teaches you to take advantage of situations that others may not see. Also, being an entrepreneur, no one's giving you anything for nothing. I mean, you're on your own, really, in many ways, as an entrepreneur. So I think it gives you the guts and the courage that you may need to take a step to take advantage of something, and someone who was not an entrepreneur or didn't have experience as an entrepreneur would be either scared to take or reluctant to take. So yeah, it's my grandson is actually in prep school now. He's too much of an entrepreneur. He had Red Bull sent to his, somehow he got it off campus and he was selling it for triple the price. He got caught doing it. But anyhow, he has that entrepreneurial spirit, and it's, of course, you don't end up like Bernie Madoff either. So there is a there is a fine line. But seriously, I would say that anytime you can think outside the box, do what you're supposed to do, plus think outside the box. That's a tough combination to beat.
Did he learn the Red Bull from the Krispy Kreme donut guy in like Iowa or something? I got in trouble for going across the state line.
Yeah.
So as we close, I mean, there's a lot. So I'm going to give a 6-part question, and you take whichever part you want in terms of answering. I mean, what advice could you give young people? Also, reflection on the notion of sacrifice. I mean, one of the things that we talk about is, right, you choose a life in public service. There's a sacrifice involved. It's not only for you, but it's for your family. If you can reflect on that, and then close us out with, the thought process for announcing your retirement and stepping away from politics.
Okay. What was the first part of the question?
Advice to any advice you can give young people thinking about a life in public service.
Yeah. Okay. I would say, first of all, if you do want to go into politics or government, it's great. Think of where you may want to be, what you may want to do, but make sure you always have the alternative there, because life in politics can end overnight. You may be running the best campaign, you may be running a great office, and the guy next to you gets involved in a scandal and they take it out on everybody. I mean, your career could end overnight in politics. Always have something, whether it's law, whether it's real estate, whether it's accountancy, whether it's psychology, have something that you can always have besides the political game. Also, it's important to know that. It's important for the people in politics to know that they can strangle you. You can always say, listen, I can walk away if I have to. You may not want to, but let them think you will. So it's always good to have that degree, to have that experience, to have the alternative profession to go to. Also, if you can find a profession that sort of relates to politics, like whether it involves social work, whether it involves law enforcement, something that can be adaptable. But also realize that so much is happenstance. You could be living in an area where the person's going to be there for the next 30 years, and you want to run for that job. Again, I was lucky. I was there with a leader who wanted to get out. I was there with a congressman who wanted to get out. Mm-hmm. So there was, but again, if I had moved in a half a mile from my house, the guy there who was the local leader was 2 years younger than me. He's still there. So he would have buried me if I was there. I would have gone nowhere. So be ready for disappointment, and be ready to, don't think if you lay out A, B, C, D that you're necessarily going to get to E. Just be ready to move and adapt, and be ready to roll with the punches. And then as far as why I decided, say 28 years in politics, I never thought I'd be there. I never, growing up in Sunnyside or working over the West Side yards, certainly when Dr. Flynn was telling me I know what I was doing as a student, I never thought that I would end up in Congress. In fact, I still save a paper at home. It was a history test, first one he gave in junior year. It was D-, you show me nothing. That was his comment across the top. So that's, they didn't worry about egos in those days, believe me. There was no self-esteem. But again, it's a great experience, especially, Miguel mentioned after 9/11, the great work done by Tom Van Essen, Joe Dunn, Tom Regan, Richie Shearer. After 9/11, so many people wanted to do something. Well, what could you really do? Being in Congress, I could do something. I could go directly to the president, directly to the mayor, directly to the FBI, directly to, as it turned out, Homeland Security. I could also work directly for the families who were not going to get very much money after 9/11. We had to fight hard for that, really fight very, very hard. And that fight continued up to July of this year before we finally got the final bill that extends through 2090. So there's a great feeling of satisfaction. We had Superstorm Sandy. It devastated the South Shore of Long Island. And this is where you talk about grudges that you keep. These southern states, Alabama, Mississippi, when they would have hurricanes, when they had Katrina, we voted $65 billion to them in 5 days. We had devastation from Sandy. They offered us $27 billion, and we had much more damage than they had. We had a fight, and we had a fight. I remember I went on the floor of the House, then I went on national television, and again, you can study all the philosophy and all the political science you want. They were not moving at all until I went on national television, because all these guys from these states come into New York to raise money. And I said, if one person in New York gives $1 to any of these guys from any of these states, I said, you're crazy, get your head examined. The next thing I know, we got $61 billion, because that hit home. So you have to know where the sensitive points are. Why am I leaving? I could stay there, and I would like to stay there forever under ideal circumstances, but there comes a time when you have to open up a new chapter. It's a season for everything. I'm not a big guy for vacations, as my wife always complains about. My time I spent with my grandchildren and family. My daughter lived only 2 minutes away from me, and she was in politics, so that really worked out well. We could conspire together and plan things together, and she was really moving along well. But then, and she's a lawyer, she's doing well, but her husband is doing well, and his company was transferred to Charlotte, North Carolina, and it was going to be 24/7. They couldn't commute back and forth, so she decided that it was best for her kids if she went to Charlotte with her husband, and so she had to get herself off the ballot, get down there. And I was thinking about it anyway. You hit a certain stage of your life, and then I'm trying to make plane. This sounds petty in the big picture. I'm trying to make plane reservations to meet them, see them at Christmas in North Carolina. I can't make those reservations because we don't know what we're going to be doing. We could be voting on impeachment on Christmas Eve, so there's no way you can even make a plane reservation to see your grandchildren. After 28 years of 4 days a week down in Washington, maybe God's sending me a message. It's time to get out. But I have no regrets. I enjoyed every bit of it. I do say it's a little unnerving, to see that the first time people really say something good about you is when you announce you're leaving. But having said that, I'll take it any way I can get it. If I'd known this, maybe I would have left 20 years ago. It's like, without being morbid, it's like being in your own wake. It really is. And, there's two things. One, you have people saying good things about you. Then you have 6 people looking for your job. That's also another thing. But in any event, having said that, it's been a great experience, and I tried to do the best I could. And most of what I did was because I learned here at St. Francis in every way, in the classroom and in the arguments back and forth and in just hanging out with a good group of people. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Please give another round of applause to Congressman Peter King and President Martinez-Saenz.
Thank you.